Analyst relations is changing and brings unique dimensions relative to other relationship building approaches for tech brands. The dynamic nature of the technology industry, its speed of change, relentless competition, and the ubiquity of tech make it an extremely challenging sector for communications and analyst relations. AR, once confined mostly to Gartner and then IDC and even Forrester to a lesser extent, now service a variety of independent analysts. theCUBE Research is an example, and there are many others, and influencers. Take, for example, like Sarbjeet Johal, who's got a massive Twitter presence and social presence. And while not classical analyst firms, these companies will attract professionals as analysts that are experienced, they're well-connected, they know the business, they're smart, and moreover, the lines between AR and Corp Comm is blurring. And that creates opportunities and also challenges for AR practitioners. And Erin Zehr has successfully transformed Dell's AR to become a best, if not the best in class system within the technology industry. And she's recently left Dell and is joining me for a conversation around the changing nature of AR in the 2020s. Erin, welcome. It's great to see you. How are you?
Dave, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy talking to you. I appreciate the conversation today.
You bet. And what's interesting, Erin, about this is I think this is one of the first times, if not the first time, we've had an AR pro on theCUBE. And that's because part of your job is basically elevating others, right? And not putting AR in the spotlight. But the dynamic in this business is really interesting. As I said, we're seeing a blurring of lines between AR and Corp Comms. How do you think modern AR professionals are adapting or should adapt to this sort of never-ending overlap? How can they collaborate more effectively across these functions?
Well, you're right, Dave. It's new to me to get to sit here and talk with you in this way. We're usually behind the scenes in our conversations. But what I would say in the relationship within Corp Comms, it's in some places a blur of the lines, but in most places, it's an opportunity to explore collaboration in a different way. Overall, we're all looking for storytelling opportunities, ways to be consistent externally with company message, but how we go about that and the relationship management with those external groups like yours, like other analyst firms and influencers you mentioned in the introduction, how we treat those relationships on the back end, inform people, understand their business models, and importantly, understand their audience. That's what's different and takes a little bit more distinct kind of operational management within a corporation. But Corp Comms, absolutely, there's opportunity to get creative in how we approach storytelling around big moments, around small ones. When we're hoping to get accuracy out into the market, if there's a story that's a little bit tricky and we need to rely on sometimes a relationship to help us get that accurate perspective out there. Really great opportunity to do things like that together. But, opportunity too to explore collaboration differently with other teams within a corporation for things like content development, content management, different brand strategies. So it's a interesting open field of relying on our depth, relying on our relationships, how we understand this part of the industry to be evolving with the analyst community, and figuring out cool new ways to leverage that within our own corporations.
Thank you for that. When I joined IDC, actually a long time ago, it was sort of the early 80s, the notion of pay to play, honestly, it didn't exist. And then over time, we actually coined this term called advocacy. And what advocacy is you would never sort of cross a line and violate your integrity. If somebody's paying you, you wouldn't write something that you didn't believe. At the same time, you would, for money, help your clients understand where their sweet spot was and how to, amplify that. And that is, now a fundamental nature of this business. Even I would argue, maybe to a lesser extent, but even for the Gartners of the world, which I think actually do a pretty good job of, not kind of crossing that line. I think that the reality is that independent analysts and influencers, there's a big spectrum. Some will do anything for pay. Others will like, well, I can't really say that. And so that's a fine line, but it's broadened the AR landscape. In your view, how do you think AR teams should engage with these new voices and at the same time maintain credibility and relevance? Because the last thing you want is to be called out on something that's pay to play. You want something that, I mean, earned media is obviously the best, but at the same time, if it's going to be a sponsored, engagement, you want it to be defensible. So how do you see balancing, that schism?
I think it is the focus on how we manage the relationships, like I was describing before. We understand in analyst relations since the start of the function within corporations that analysts and people who are moving and engaging in an analyst-like, I'll call it, way through their respective approaches to that work. If it's more influencer-like and content development, but moving in a more analyst-like direction with NDAs in place, with really specific depth that we go in together behind the scenes. So it's a very informed perspective that helps us help analysts to identify those sweet spots, to point out to us when we can do a better job of making those points of differentiation better known in the market. But there's a lot of trust that goes into choosing who to work with in that manner. So like you were saying, Dave, with so many people coming into different influencer-like roles, it's important for AR teams to take their time and be patient a little bit when there's understandably a lot of enthusiasm to go work with new people, look for additional ways to amplify their company's position, but more isn't always better. We need to continue the focus on relationship and trust at the center of that relationship to inform investment in time and money. We always want to make sure that we're getting important insight, additive insight into our program inbound from analysts, not just the amplification and storytelling. That's a newer and rapidly evolving additional piece to the program, but it isn't maybe the beginning of how to evaluate a new relationship.
That's interesting, Erin, because there are some people that are really good storytellers and others that are really good analysts. And it's kind of a unicorn, somebody who is a great storyteller and a great analyst. That's like a superpower. And I think what I'm hearing from you is, it comes down to credibility of the individual. I mean, I think of some of the people that you worked with over the years that I really respect. I'm thinking of people like Maribel Lopez or a Bob O'Donnell. These are people that, help their clients. They have they're data-based. Their opinions are data-based. They have, deep connections within the customer community, and they add value. And that is how they lead. And that's really important. At the same time, things are changing very fast in the marketplace. And I'm going to push on all the scabs of our business. And I believe in transparency. I talked about pay to play. The other sort of pejorative is, lipstick on a pig when there's an announcement. And that's got to be hard as an AR and a comms pro when it's like, okay, we really don't have anything that's that innovative right now. We got to put something out there. What do we do? But things are changing so fast. Maybe that's an advantage because people have short memories. On the other hand, if you have too many of those, veneer announcements, putting shine on something that's really doesn't have legs, that can come back to bite you. So what do you recommend in terms of strategies to basically kind of stay informed, align messaging, and avoid that little trap that I just mentioned?
Well, avoiding that little trap while also considering this evolving landscape and new voices, additional perspective that's very worthwhile to listen to, we have to consider, like I mentioned earlier, each analyst's and firm's audience. Who are they talking to? And that audience perspective helps us to understand, where is the insight coming from? Is it customer oriented? Is it investor oriented? Is it somewhere in between with market relevance, partner grounding, et cetera? But understanding the who the insight is for can help us think really clearly about where to bring an analyst in more closely. So in those in-between times, going deeper on what are we thinking about? What are we planning for? What is work in progress? Early views on demos. It's not just to do it. It's not for, the AR team's sake to have another engagement that we've tallied up, but it is thinking critically about where can we invest time in between the big moments that will help advance understanding, deepen the trust and I think credibility with where we're talking about, where we're trying to take a part of the business or the overall business strategy. It's showing. It's not just telling when there's an announcement, but it's showing the progress along the way. But again, being purposeful with how will that engagement advance understanding, a relationship objective that we might have, or the way an analyst thinks about how a company fits into a broader landscape.
One of the other things I wanted to pick your brain on, and I actually think Dell, when you were running Dell, and was AR was pretty good at this, but a lot of companies, and big companies, it's like a machine. And once there's inertia and momentum around that machine, it's hard to unwind. And what I'm getting to is a lot of companies, they put analysts and influencers in buckets, or journalists and analysts. You're a journalist, you're over here, that's Corp Comm. You're an analyst, you're over here, that's AR. The two shall never meet. Sometimes, actually, again, you guys would oftentimes at big shows put both groups together, which I actually quite enjoyed, because you get a mix of perspectives. At the same time, they have different needs. Analysts want to geek out, they want to be more technical. You guys at Dell used to, and still do, invite me to the financial analyst meetings, myself. Guys like Matt Eastwood would attend. We get a lot of that, but the financial analysts have completely different needs than industry analysts. But at the same time, there's a lot of cross pollination. So how do you think about that? Putting in buckets and being strict about it kind of doesn't work in my mind because of the changes that we talked about up front. At the same time, maybe that serves those audiences better. What do you think about that?
I would say putting someone into a bucket and keeping them there forever, that seemed pretty boring for everybody involved. But, thinking about where can we be, again, deliberate with how we combine up people into a room. So those times that you described, Dave, with inviting reporters and analysts or financial analysts and industry analysts into the same room, that was deliberate. It's because we know that a question that an industry analyst maybe asks in front of reporters helps give reporters some different context. Or we know that you and Matt Eastwood and a couple other analysts are talking to the financial analysts with some regularity or have some following by the investor community. And so, putting you in that context, we hope is helpful for what you're doing more broadly with your firms in your day-to-day, just outside of, distinct interaction with Dell on technology roadmap or similar with other companies. I don't mean to make it specific there. But again, thinking about mashups creatively and with purpose, just like we think about mashups of group sessions with a number of analysts together at an event. We want to think about how that room dynamic is going to flow and how what we hope is that people will build on each other's perspective and hear something new through a question somebody else asked, but just enriching the overall experience and dynamic.
Yeah, I always like the way you guys took a number of independents. I mean, there was never, if I recall, there was never somebody from Gartner there. They wouldn't allow that. IDC, I think maybe the same, although IDC is much more collaborative. We have IDC in theCUBE all the time, same with Forrester. But, those big three, you would kind of isolate them, but then open up the floodgates to the independents. And I found, again, when you think about being in the room with people like Tim Crawford or Maribel Lopez, Bob O'Donnell, many, many others, Matt Eastwood. Actually, Matt, I think we collaborate quite a bit with. You do learn a lot. Did you find that the outcomes were, I don't want to say better, because I don't want to compare, but were they, I guess I am comparing, were they as high quality as when you were gathering a group of analysts at a single firm? Did you see the level of, you might still have seen the level of diversity within a company. I mean, at IDC, there were a lot of diverse opinions, a lot of times a lot of debates. So maybe that happens, but did you discern a difference when you gather groups of independent analysts together like that in a session?
Yes, for along a certain path. I think, in your example of having a room full of lovely, delightful IDC analysts, that room full might be 14 different IDC analysts who have very different coverage areas. And what we're hoping in that grouping is that we're helping those analysts to cross streams a little bit and think about connections and things that a company is doing that, otherwise might take a long time for us to help build out those connections in a more typical program. And let's say sustainability, if we have a focused path and track with an analyst covering sustainability and want to build in some perspective of, what are we doing to partner differently, work on certain technology development, build in sustainability into AI systems. That kind of conversation is relevant to many different analysts with coverage areas at depth. When you think about grouping independent analysts, the conversation can go in multiple different directions, and that's very exciting. But often, independents are looking at the full picture of a company and doing that pretty consistently. May have background and depth in one technology area, but are often really great at that overall connected story and strategy.
I'm glad you mentioned sustainability. Last week at MWC, we had Carolina Melanesi on, who was amazing. I mean, she's so smart. I learned so much just talking to her. And she and our Savannah Peterson kind of went off on a great topic, which was women in tech. We got into this fashion discussion. I learned a lot. I did more listening, less speaking, which is rare for me. But it was really good. I'm mentioning all these names. I'm sure I'm leaving out so many, quality analysts. But again, just to sort of underscore, there's just a lot of really bright minds out there, and there's not a lot of barrier to entry in this business. You can hang a shingle, and as long as you have relationships and you can add value, you can make a pretty good living. But I want to come back to just in something you really have emphasized here, and I know something that you're really strong at is that deep relationships and collaboration. But it's not only with external analysts, but it's also internal teams, with its product marketing, sales, the corner office. What do you think about that in terms of AR's role in fostering those cross-functional relationships? And then I have a follow-up question on the reporting structure, but let's start with part A first, and then I want to get your thoughts on part B.
Well, most companies, and presumably all at some point will, but most companies looking at the way that AI can serve internal business processes. And so there's just unending opportunity to explore that evolution together with other teams, teams where they're relying on analyst insight or asset development, collaboration with analysts in really typical and traditional ways. But as we see industry analysts evolving their business, are open to exploring new ways to collaborate that could be, additionally valuable. But then there's how we share information internally that opens up, new creativity, what insight, what resource is useful to product marketing, to sales, what do executives in the corner office look for to help, guide some decision making, or where they're interested in gut checks and perspective. It's how we simplify that information flow inside of a company where there's a lot of fun to be had and exploration, but coming together and asking tough questions about what you do and don't value, and why, what's hard in the day-to-day job that you're doing, and how we can work together to, simplify and have a good time and have some fun in the process. The analyst community is just so fun. And one of my favorite parts of doing this type of work within a corporation, it's the people involved and the depth of curiosity and, genuine interest in seeing where technology and business development can go. So many different roots in that perspective that are well and hard earned, that are just interesting to learn from. So that's an approach that I have taken. You mentioned too the relationship building. We talked a little bit about analyst relationships. We talked a little bit about internal relationships, but I would be remiss if I didn't also bring up the relationships across the analyst relations community, which I think are special. I have certainly benefited from and learned from my peers at other companies. That kind of genuine curiosity and interest in helping everyone to do better, help simplify really complex topics for our respective customers' benefit or market understanding. It's a special community. And so give it a shout out to the AR managers and professionals out there. I know you work with many.
Absolutely.
Fabulous ones.
But one of the reasons why I think you've been so successful at navigating this transition that we've been talking about, or this these blurred lines, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you came out of the corp comms side of things, and then we were calling you an AR practitioner here, but you are more than that, and so you have a good understanding of the needs and the strategies and what works and what doesn't, and both sides of that house. From a reporting standpoint, this is one of those it depends questions, but we've seen it both ways. We've seen AR reporting to product marketing. We've seen AR reporting to corp comms. In rare cases, actually that's not that rare. And some smaller companies, AR and PR are sort of one and the same. They report oftentimes, to the CMO, or even have a seat at the table. How do you think about reporting structures in this new world?
I think the personality that AR reports to is more important than the business alignment, where it sits within an organization. So what I mean by that is someone who is well respected within the company, well respected to bring new ideas to a conversation, who can help remove roadblocks when that's necessary, but someone who is there to respect the value and trust in developing these important relationships within the analyst community, and who can be interested in relying on the expertise of either the individual AR manager or the team. It is a collaborative function for sure. And there just is a lot of in the day-to-day that we're doing on our own. So I've been fortunate in my career to get to report to some really strong leaders who I have always felt got my back. So I hate to give you a not clear answer on that, but it's the one I have.
I want to come back to sort of what professionals like yourself value. I'll tell you a quick little story. When I started in this business, I was like the disk drive analyst. Back then, there were like 100 disk drive companies. And today, they're like 2. But at any rate, I went to visit they weren't called CMOs back then. They were like whatever, VPs of marketing at a company called Maxtor. They made disk drives. And this guy, Skip Kilsdonk, and I was just a young pup. And he said to me, of course, I'm like any analyst, I'm trying to sell, like buy my stuff. And he said to me, look, Dave, you're here, but I'm not going to pay you for peddling your insights unless you bring data and you can help me drive my business. You're of no value to me. And that was a hard pill to swallow because I had all these insights that I was peddling. But it was a lesson that I took to heart and always, came back, learned to really drive, database decision making, and that helped a lot in my personal career. But then, as I said, this whole notion of advocacy emerged, and now it's influence. How many Twitter followers do you have? Are you getting quoted in magazines? That was, by the way, that was always important. At IDC, we used to have spiffs if you got quoted in the Wall Street Journal or, Business Week. Today, it's, going on TV or creating your own TV in the case of theCUBE.
Yeah, right.
So if you had to break down the value pie, insights, data, influence, other, how do you divide that value?
That's the $1 million question, Dave. And I think the answer is it's a big fat depends. It depends on where a company is, how it's perceived by and represented by and within the analyst community. Is the company trying to break through and get noticed by customers, get in front of them? There's probably a different balance there in insight and influence, probably more goals around sort of external positioning and getting noticed. That doesn't mean there has to be some insight from the analyst community to help guide what will be meaningful in that representation. But other bigger companies with big established customer bases are probably looking for a bit of a different balance in insight on how to transform a business function that may lead to, influence in customer understanding, either through direct conversations with those customers, through reports that analysts produce, or through the platforms that some firms have created. And, analysts have, like you said, been providing in a variety of traditional media ways as well. So I think important to get grounded on where is your company and what does your company need. There's not one answer for that balance of insight and influence, but that is the dynamic that everybody should be looking at, and everybody should have data to help inform their guidance, their program for their company, and to inform, interactions. What comes next? What do we need to get out of this relationship 6 months, a year from now to, help give some purpose to leaders involved?
I remember I wrote a post one time when Frank Slootman took over at Snowflake, and I used the term playbook. He's probably going to bring his ServiceNow playbook to Snowflake, is what I said. And he reached out to me and said, I don't use playbooks, Dave. I am a situational leader. I learned that in the military. Another lesson that I learned from one of my many, business heroes. And it applies in this context. And the question I'm going to ask you about first principles. You transformed Dell's AR into what many consider, including myself, a best-in-class program. I think it is, top 5%. And I know we've had this conversation before, and you've given credit to your team, and I'm sure you will again. But situationally, you've got Dell. Dell, big company. In some ways, simpler to understand. You got client, you got, enterprise. But within those, there's a rich texture in many, many dimensions. Companies like IBM also have a high quality analyst relations program, much more complicated just in terms of understanding the business. I think they sometimes have trouble just presenting the business. They change it every, 5 or 7 years, how they, represent the business. I think of a company like Oracle. It's very, very Larry-like. It's sort of military in its approach. So my point is it's situational. But coming back to the question, what lessons have you learned and guiding principles that you think are going to define this next era of analyst relations, and kind of what advice do you have for practitioners?
I appreciate this question so much. I've thought a lot about it. I think that maintaining a really rich sense of curiosity is probably the biggest thing that we can do in analyst relations, from understanding where the analyst community and where individual firms, analyst influencers are heading, what they're trying to do, where are they trying to take their research, what topics are they looking to stitch together in fresh ways. Are there ways that our respective companies can participate in that building that is mutually beneficial? Bringing that curiosity over to internal teams to understand what's changing with our customers, what's changing with how customers are discovering information, learning what they're trying to learn, making decisions. All these things will continue to change as AI progresses and doing its thing, and therefore will continue to change how companies and teams internally are interacting with each other to serve those communities well, and continue to develop and deliver high quality products and solutions. And so maintaining that curiosity and spirit of seeking to understand versus defending what might have worked well 5 years ago is going to be the right thing for everybody, and hopefully more fun too.
Yeah, hopefully. What do you think about AI and its impact on the business? I think about, when I go back to pre-internet, you would laugh, the fax machine was transformative when I was an IDC analyst, because we were able to get fast insights. This is how we beat DataQuest. We were able to get insights out super fast. Somebody would announce a quarter, we would sit there by the fax machine and just, send out fax flashes, we called them. And that level of service, that speed of information was valued, and it helped us compete. Then the internet came along. You didn't need that anymore. That became a commodity. Do you see something similar, a similar dynamic with AI in terms of the value that analysts can bring? And the second part of the question is, how do you see AI impacting the AR function with AR practitioners? Are they just kind of simply using ChatGPT-like tools, Llama, Grok, et cetera? Or are there other opportunities to drive automation in workflows beyond off-the-shelf tools? But first, on the analyst side, how do you see AI changing the value pie that we've been talking about?
I think for sure AI will change the value pie. It will change how analyst relations teams work. What I believe is important to maintain through that change is the individual expertise, critical thinking, and the connections and knowledge that, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of hard-earned wisdom and expertise that people have in their roles across this community now. I think AI can help in analyst firms to kind of coalesce insight and data that maybe firms have from a variety of conversations on a variety of different platforms, that getting companies quicker access to that kind of data and insight that is just kind of auto-distilled, super powerful. And I can imagine, and I believe some companies are heading in that direction. I think some companies are starting to use AI to analyst firms, starting to use AI for their written commentary or to gather data for reports, to automate some of those processes. And I think some AR teams are watching that. And we're all here for efficiency and to automate what makes sense, but sometimes using AI to do some of those functions can, again, kind of automate out important context that is so critical to what we rely on from the analyst community. So I think that's just going to be something to watch, and something for AR teams to watch as well. Is there are certainly ways to, use AI to facilitate note taking, to distill insights from those conversations, but I've never been able to use any of those tools to get to better insights than what I can come to by listening and thinking through conversation. So again, I think there's a balance there. I don't know what that end result looks like or when it will be, but I think some important critical thinking to bring into evaluation of what teams choose to do and questions to ask of, the partners we rely on so much in their approaches to use of various technologies themselves.
Yeah, thank you. How do you think, maybe my last question, or maybe my penultimate question, how do you think that AR pros should measure the impact of their function, brand awareness, revenue, other metrics, and how do you measure that?
All of the above. And similar, it depends. For the same reasons that I described before. And what does a company need? Presumably with that kind of aligned focus on what a company needs, there are partners in other places within the organization to help come together on some of that measurement. So there could be, places within Salesforce that you're either able to scrape existing data or add in a field to collect data that can be representative of what customers are hearing from the analyst community, or connections that a team can make between sales impact and revenue and analyst relations programs. Brand recognition, there are different ways that a lot of that is measured, and some of it is very traditional in audience and reach. Some of it is in breakthrough. So where is perspective? Where does it start? Where does it continue? And can you draw kind of a line from effort and work into longer term shift in storytelling and narratives? So some of it I think is more straightforward in data that you can collect, and some of it is watching how narratives evolve over time. There are a lot of variables in between. And this is a great example of where curiosity can be really helpful to dig into, again, existing measurements within companies, what different tools can provide to, give some data and grounding to how your team is helping to deliver on what the company decides its priorities.
And I would imagine different firms, different analyst firms obviously contribute in different ways to those measures.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep. And that's an important thing to ask different analysts is sometimes you mentioned Twitter followers earlier. Sometimes that is something interesting to look at, and other times it's not. It's really more of community and impact of the commentary versus what may or may not be kind of an easy Twitter audience to understand. So some numbers aren't always very transparent. And so being, a little bit skeptical of some of those numbers sometimes is healthy.
So last question, what's next for Erin Zehr? I really appreciate you spending so much time with us today and digging into this important topic. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a while and can't thank you enough, but how's it going?
I always love talking.
What's your future looking like here?
Oh, we'll see. I'm exploring a couple different directions and have always just enjoyed keeping up with you. I've had regular check-ins with a handful of analysts over these past few months, and certainly regular check-ins with a number of peers at other companies in the industry. It's very lovely community, and one that is always looking out for each other and where we might help each other out. So I'm exploring a few different opportunities, and I hope to share some updates with you. I will share some updates with you soon.
Well, we wish you the best. You are a situational leader, to invoke Frank Slootman's principle, with a big heart. And you are somebody that has gained great respect in this industry from both your peers that have, folks that have worked for you, your peers in the industry, and analysts like myself, Erin Zehr. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave.
theCUBE.
Appreciate it.
All right, you're very welcome. And thank you for watching, everybody. This is Dave Vellante, and we'll see you next time.